So you may think you need a trust, but what type of trust do you really need? Do you need a revocable living trust? Maybe it's a first-party special needs trust. Maybe it's a third-party special needs trust. Could be a Dynasty Trust. Could be something completely different. How do you know? In this video, I'm going to talk about a lot of the most popular types of trusts out there and which situations you might need them, so you can decide for yourself which is most appropriate for you. So first, we should talk about what a trust is, right? Why are we even talking about trusts? Well, a trust is basically a legal agreement, okay? It's a contract set up between the person creating it, who we call the settlor or the grantor or the trustor, and it's an agreement between them and the trustee, the person managing the trust, for the benefit of the beneficiary. And in all of these different types of trusts, you might have different people acting in these roles, right? So keep in mind, that's really what a trust is. It's an agreement. I also think of it as a basket. Trusts hold things for different purposes. So let's look at the different types of trusts and what they're available for. So the first main type of trust that probably comes to most people's minds when we're talking about it is what we call a revocable living trust. So this is a trust that you set up in order to avoid probate on your death. That's the main reason. So in California, for example, you can have up to about $184,000 in your name, and the assets would avoid probate. But if you have more than that amount, those assets are going to go through probate if they're in your name and they don't have a beneficiary designation listed or they're not in a trust. So what you do is you set up a revocable living trust and you put your assets into that trust. And in the trust, it says where things can go. And so it avoids probate. Now, revocable living trusts, I think, are the most straightforward ones out there because you are wearing all of the hats. You are the settlor, the trustor, the one creating the trust. You are the trustee, and you're the beneficiary. So because of all of that, because it's revocable, you can change it at any time. It just counts as your money. You don't have to set up a separate tax ID number. You don't have to file separate tax returns. It just goes on your 1040, but it's titled in a slightly different way. So instead of saying Jane Smith is the owner, it would be Jane Smith, trustee of the Jane Smith Revocable Living Trust as the owner. And since it's titled differently, it passes according to the terms of the trust and it can avoid probate. So super important trust that just about everybody in California needs. All right, so the next type of trust I want to talk about is called a special needs trust. And I want to talk about it because I specialize in them. All right, so these are trusts for somebody who's disabled, a disabled beneficiary. They might be receiving public benefits, they might not, but if they inherit some money, they probably can't manage it themselves. They're not able to, and it might actually bump them off of public benefits. So the parent or someone else can set up a special needs trust for their disabled loved one, and all the inheritance will go into that trust and protect the money. So somebody else is managing it, okay? So in that situation, you could be the settlor, the creator, and also you could be the initial trustee, though you'll want to set up who's going to be the successor trustee. And as I talk about in a different video, that's a very important decision, all right? Then your child is the beneficiary. So unlike the revocable trust, where you wear all the hats, with the special needs trust, you wear two of the hats, the settlor and the trustee, but the child is the beneficiary. That's a third-party special needs trust. Now let's compare it to the third type of trust, which is a first-party special needs trust. So that's a trust where the child has come into their own money. All right, so it's the child's money that goes into the trust. That's why we call it a first-party special needs trust. The child is the first party putting their own money in. Well, who's the settlor of a first-party special needs trust? Well, it can be the child themselves if they're over 18 and they have capacity. They can set up their own first-party special needs trust, or it could be the parent or the grandparent, or the court could set it up. And then the child puts their own money in and the child is the beneficiary. But again, somebody else is acting as trustee of the trust. And because the child doesn't have access to the money, it doesn't count as their money. They can continue to receive public benefits, and the money is managed on their behalf, so they can't squander it, or financial predators might not go after them. So I have a special video that talks about what is a special needs trust, and goes through the differences between the third party and the first party special needs trusts, and also how to fund them. And you can watch that video right over here. So the fourth type of trust I want to talk about is the Dynasty Trust. All right, so this is a trust for someone to receive their inherited money. Now, the idea of a Dynasty Trust was actually developed for estate tax protection. So for wealthy people, they said, well, if I have money and it goes to my kid, then I'm going to have to pay estate tax, or my estate will, on whatever goes to my kid, and then my kid is going to have to pay estate tax when their money goes to their kids. So a Dynasty Trust is actually set up to skip a generation or two of estate taxes, right? So the money can start out, it's in the Revocable Trust, and in the Revocable Trust it says, upon our death goes to the Dynasty Trust, and it's still, you have to look at the estate taxes at that point. But anything that goes into the Dynasty Trust and is exempt from estate taxes then passes to the child's children or your grandchildren free of estate taxes. Super cool. Now, keep in mind the estate tax exemption nowadays is $12.06 million per person, right? But in 2026, that's decreasing to about $6.5 million per person. So it is a concern for some people, but not everybody. However, there's two other benefits of a Dynasty Trust that I think are entirely underrated, and we should really focus on. One of them is, what if your child endures a divorce, all right? Anything that they inherit is their own separate property, but they might go ahead and transmute it. They might buy something with their spouse and make it into community property, and then if they get divorced, the spouse gets half, which is awful, right? So instead, we want everything that the child inherits to be put into a specialized trust that the child can manage themselves. So a Dynasty Trust can be set up for the child's inheritance, and everything in that stays separate property. That money can still be used to buy a home or whatever, but then upon the child's death, anything in that trust, right, that the trust buys the home, that home comes 100% back to your child if they get a divorce. Right, so super great divorce protections, and also protections for creditors. If the child is not acting as trustee, it has a very high level of protection where you say, well, it's not the child's money, it's the trust's money. And even though that seems like a small distinction, in the law, it makes a big difference, all right? So if your child gets sued, let's say they're in a high lawsuit field, or they're in a car accident or something, that money can be segregated and it's not available to creditors. So that's a Dynasty Trust. I think they're terrific for many of my clients. And if you haven't set up a Dynasty Trust, it's something really to reach out to us or your own estate planning attorney so we can get that going. Okay, so the fifth type of trust actually has a funny name, all right? It's called a Crummey Trust, Crummey. So this doesn't mean that it's a horrible trust. It's just named after the poor guy, estate of Crummey, right? So that was his last name. So what this trust does is it's intended if you want to make gifts to your child, but you don't want the child to be able to manage the money. All right, what you can do is you can make gifts to the child, and here's the basic idea. It's more complicated than this, but this is kind of a basic overview. You make gifts of the annual exclusion amount, which is the total amount that you can give to any number of people and still not have to report it to the IRS as a gift, okay? And this year it's $16,000. In 2022. So you make a gift of the $16,000 to the child's Crummey Trust, and then you send a letter to the child saying, hello child, you have a month, for example, to withdraw that money. So that money is available to the child. They can withdraw it, but they know if they withdraw it, there won't be any more money, right? So they need to keep it in there, right? But since they have the opportunity to withdraw the money, it qualifies as a completed gift for the annual exclusion. So the $16,000 goes in there. And then once the month passes, then somebody else is managing the money for your child. So it's a good way to pass money from your generation to the next generation without having to pay any gift taxes. And it's also good for, let's say, college preparation or, transferring for other educational purposes. So that's called a Crummey Trust. So the next type of trust I'm going to talk about is called an Irrevocable Life Insurance Trust, or sometimes we call it an ILIT, I-L-I-T. So the idea of this trust is that you get a life insurance policy and you put it inside of this trust. And upon your death, then the proceeds go into this trust. And in the trust, it says where you want things to go. But because the trust is outside of your estate, it doesn't count as part of your estate for estate tax purposes. All right, so let's say you have a $10 million estate and it's mostly real property, and the estate tax exemption is dropping to $6 million. Oh no, you're going to have to pay some estate taxes when you die, or your estate will. However, you don't want your real estate to have to be sold right away in a fire sale in order to pay those estate taxes. So instead, you can set up a life insurance policy on yourself or even on somebody else. And this is something, by the way, to talk with a financial advisor or a life insurance professional. I don't specialize in this, but I'm trying to give you just kind of a basic overview of what it is, all right? So you have a life insurance policy that's not owned by you, but it's owned by the trust. And when that policy is funded, it's not part of your taxable estate. So your estate does not have to pay estate taxes. So a lot of times people set this up to pay whatever estate taxes might be due. And so it's extra cash to pay that instead of having to sell one of the assets in your estate in order to pay estate taxes. So that's most commonly when we see irrevocable life insurance trusts being used, but they can be used in other situations as well. So the next trust I'm going to talk about is a charitable remainder trust. And this type of trust, just like the ILIT, is for high net worth individuals. So usually this is somebody who's upwards of $12 million of an estate, or maybe in 2026 down to $6 million, right? So what you do is, let's say you have an asset, let's say you just really hit the jackpot and you bought Google stock a long time ago, and it has a very low cost basis. So if someone were to inherit it, or maybe retirement accounts or something, that they would have to pay a lot of capital gains tax if they were to receive it. Instead, what you can do is you can put that asset into a charitable remainder trust. And during that time, you or a loved one can get an income stream from the money that's generated from that. You specify the income stream. It has to be within parameters. Again, I don't do these trusts, but I'm just letting you know, if you've heard this term, this is what it's for. You get an income stream, but then the remainder of the assets go to a charity or several charities. And because it goes to a charity, the charity doesn't have to pay any estate taxes or capital gains taxes. So it's a really nice way to set up an income stream for you or a loved one, but especially if you have a charitable intent, if you have a charity that you really want to benefit from it, you need the income stream now, but ultimately you want the money to go to the charity. It can be passed along to the charity in tax efficient ways. Okay, the last type of trust, again, total overview. This is also for someone who might have a taxable estate of $12 million or $6 million. Let's say they have a pretty well valued property in Los Altos Hills or Hillsborough, a property that's worth a lot, and they want to transfer it along to their kids. But if they were to pass it along to their kids, they'd be using up dollar for dollar their gift tax exemption. So instead, what they can do is they can put their house into a personal residence trust, which is sometimes called a qualified personal residence trust, or a QPRT, QPRT. We sure love our acronyms in estate planning. All right, so you put the house in the trust and you say, okay, we have to live out a certain term, let's say 10 years. We have to live for 10 more years. And if we survive the term of the trust, then at the end of the term, our children receive the house. Now, what is the value of that gift? Well, that's a good question. Let's say it's a $6 million house. If you made a gift, you say, hey, our kids get this house tomorrow, then that would be using up $6 million of your total estate tax exemption. But if you put it in the QPRT, if you put it in the personal residence trust, and the kids have to wait for 10 years, well, think about it. If somebody were to give you a gift and they said, hey, here's a wonderful gift, but you need to put it in a desk and come back in 10 years, and then you get the gift. Well, what is that gift valued at, right? It's not valued at the total $6 million because you have to wait for it. It's not worth as much. So sometimes you can take like a 30 or 40% discount on the value of the gift. So that's a way to give away assets at a lower value according to the IRS, but the kids end up getting the full house. Now, there's definitely drawbacks to these methods. There can be challenges that come up, other tax issues, but I just want to describe kind of what these trusts do with an overall perspective. So if you hear this term and you're like, do I need a QPRT? Well, If you have a relatively, high value property that you want to go to your kids and you want it to go at a lower value, you might choose to do that. A lot of these, what I call high net worth planning opportunities, they take a lot of time. You give up control. They cost a lot of money. So it's really something to think about. But again, it's good to know that these trusts are out there. So the next time somebody comes up to you and says, you need a trust, you can stop and say, well, what type of trust do I really need? And it really depends on the situation that you're in and the goal that you're trying to accomplish. What are you trying to do by setting up and funding this trust? That will inform what type of trust you need. So we've talked about a lot of different types of trusts. If you really like to learn more about the terms that are used in these trusts, I suggest you watch this video over here where I define a lot of the terms that we use as estate planners in our own special language so you can better understand how your trust is being drafted. So I'll see you over there.